May 5, 2009. Columbia, Illinois. Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow receives a call from his neighbor across the street. It's 6:43 in the morning. The neighbor, Chris Coleman, says he's on his way home from the gym but can't reach his wife, Sherry. Nobody's answering the phone. She should be up getting the kids ready for school. "Can you go check on them?" Chris asks. "I'm worried." Barlow agrees. He's a detective with the Columbia Police Department, but he's also been Chris's neighbor for 5 years. He knows the family has been receiving threats, knows they've been scared. So he heads over. Barlow tries the front door. Locked. Nobody answers. He walks around to the basement. That's when he sees it. A window open, screen removed. He calls for backup, enters through the window. The smell hits him immediately. Spray paint. Then he sees the walls. Red spray paint, messages everywhere. Punished. I am always watching. You have paid. It looks like something from a Manson crime scene. And Barlow knows this isn't going to end well. He moves upstairs. More messages, more spray paint, leading him toward the bedrooms. That's when he finds them. Sherry Coleman, age 31. 11-year-old Garrett. 9-year-old Gavin. What he finds will haunt him forever. Chris Coleman arrives home moments later. Sits on the driveway, starts sobbing. Says he feels like he's going to be sick. Police escort him away from the house, console him, tell him they're doing everything they can. But something doesn't add up. Chris never asks what happened, never asks who did this, never tries to go inside. And when investigators check the threatening messages, the ones that supposedly came from some crazed fanatic targeting the family, they trace them back to an IP address, Chris Coleman's own computer. This is the story of Christopher Coleman, son of a preacher, Marine, bodyguard to one of the world's most famous televangelists. A man who seemed to have everything: faith, family, a 6-figure job. And how he threw it all away for a woman who wasn't his wife. Christopher Coleman was born March 20th, 1977, to Ron and Connie Coleman, both Christian evangelical pastors in Chester, Illinois. Chris was the quietest of their 3 sons, reserved, well-behaved, the kind of kid who never caused trouble. In junior high, he was described as kind, a team player, someone who never lost his temper. Teachers liked him. Coaches appreciated his discipline. Church was always at the core of Chris's life. His parents ran Grace Church in Chester, a small but active congregation. Chris was there every Sunday, every youth group meeting, every church function. He grew up immersed in Christian values, biblical teachings, and the expectation that he would live a life of faith. After high school, when a Marine Corps recruiter visited, Chris was inspired by the idea of service and discipline. He signed up, became a canine handler in the Marines. It was an honorable path that suited his quiet, controlled personality. It was at a K-9 training seminar at Lackland Air Force Base where 22-year-old Chris met 21-year-old Sherry Weiss. Sherry was an Air Force military police officer, born in 1977 in Cook County, Illinois. Raised in a loving, supportive family, bright, kind, loyal to her core, the kind of person who lit up a room when she walked in. Friends described her as generous and always willing to help others. In August 1997, just 3 months after meeting, Chris brought Sherry to Chester to meet his parents. Ron and Connie weren't impressed. Years later, Ron would recall that Sherry was a worldly little girl, little short shorts, tattoo on her leg, not the person we thought he'd be with. She didn't fit their image of what a pastor's son's wife should be. The next day, Chris and Sherry drove to Chicago, called Ron to tell him they'd gotten married at a courthouse. No ceremony, no family, just the two of them. Ron and Connie were shocked and disappointed. They'd wanted a church wedding, wanted to be part of the celebration. Chris's parents would later claim he immediately regretted the quick marriage, that he was repentant about the elopement. But if Chris had doubts, he never expressed them to Sherry. Soon after the courthouse wedding, they learned Sherry was pregnant. Garrett was born April 30th, 1998. A healthy baby boy. Gavin followed in 2000. Two sons who would become Chris and Sherry's entire world. The family settled into a comfortable two-story home in Columbia, Illinois, a quiet suburb outside St. Louis. Nice neighborhood, good schools, safe streets, close enough to Ron and Connie and Chester that they could visit regularly, but far enough that Chris and Sherry could build their own life. Chris landed an incredible job that would change their lives. Personal bodyguard for Joyce Meyer, world-famous Christian televangelist and head of Joyce Meyer Ministries, one of the largest and most influential Christian ministries in the world. Joyce knew the Coleman family from Chester, had known Chris since he was a boy attending his parents' church. When she needed security for her worldwide speaking engagements, she hired Chris for her security team. He quickly proved himself capable and trustworthy. Within a short time, he rose to become her personal bodyguard. The job paid $100,000 a year, a substantial salary that provided the family with financial security. It came with extensive international travel. Chris would accompany Joyce to massive arena events around the world, protecting her as she spread the gospel to hundreds of thousands of people. From the outside, the Colemans looked like they had the perfect life. Beautiful two-story home in a safe neighborhood. Two handsome, intelligent sons who were doing well in school. Chris with his important, prestigious job protecting one of Christianity's most prominent voices. But beneath that perfect surface, cracks were forming that would eventually shatter everything. The extensive travel that came with Chris's job had a significant downside. He was gone more than he was home. Sometimes for weeks at a time, accompanying Joyce Meyer to speaking engagements across the United States and around the world. Sherry raised Garrett and Gavin essentially alone. She handled all the day-to-day responsibilities of parenting, the homework, the school events, the soccer practices, the piano lessons, the bedtime routines, the parent-teacher conferences, all while Chris was halfway around the world. She confided in friends that Chris wasn't affectionate when he was home, that after the rare occasions they were intimate, he'd tell her not to take it to mean he loved her. Can you imagine hearing that from your spouse? The cruelty and coldness of those words? There were constant arguments about money. Chris was the only one bringing in income, and he never let Sherry forget it. Sherry enjoyed shopping and donating to charities. She had a generous heart and wanted to help others. But Chris would use the finances as a way to control her. Every purchase questioned, every donation criticized. Tensions mounted steadily. Friends recall Sherry saying she wanted to go to marriage counseling. She believed they could work through their problems with professional help. Chris would agree to go, would put on a good face in front of the counselor, would act like the perfect husband during the sessions. Then he'd be cruel to her at home afterward, telling her she was the problem, that nothing was his fault. Sherry told one friend, when he came home demanding a divorce, he would say hurtful things like, "I never loved you." But Sherry loved Chris. She loved him too much to give up on the marriage. She'd taken her vows seriously, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. She believed that with faith, counseling, and commitment, they could fix what was broken. Then in 2008, things got significantly worse. Chris confided in friends that he was planning to divorce Sherry after the holidays. Just get through Christmas with the family, put on a good show, then ended in the new year. Around the same time, Sherry told friends she suspected Chris was having an affair with an old high school friend of hers, a woman she'd introduced him to herself, someone she'd trusted, someone she'd welcomed into their lives. "You want to see the woman my husband's having an affair with?" Sherry asked one friend bitterly, pulling up a photo on Facebook. Her name was Tara Lintz, cocktail waitress in St. Petersburg, Florida. Sherry's friend from high school. The betrayal was devastating, not just from Chris, but from someone Sherry had considered a friend. But still, Sherry wanted to make the marriage work. She refused to file for divorce. She believed in the sanctity of marriage, believed that Chris would eventually come to his senses, that he would remember the vows they'd made, that he would think about their sons. Then on November 14th, 2008, something else started happening. Chris began receiving threatening emails. The messages expressed extreme hatred toward Joyce Meyer and her ministry. But strangely, instead of threatening Joyce directly, they threatened Chris and his family. "Tell Joyce to stop preaching the lies, or Chris's family will suffer," one read. "If I can't get to Joyce, then I will get to someone close to her. I will harm them all as they sleep." Chris reported the threats to police immediately. His neighbor, Detective Barlow, concerned about the family's safety, set up a surveillance camera aimed at the Coleman mailbox. Police increased patrols around the house. The threats were taken seriously. More threats arrived over the following months, hand-delivered to the mailbox, escalating in severity, getting more specific, more menacing, more detailed about what might happen. The final message arrived April 27, 2009, just over a week before the tragedy. "I'm giving you the last warning. Stop today or else. I know your schedule. You can't hide from me forever. I'm always watching. Your worst nightmare is about to happen." The Coleman family was terrified. Sherry was scared for her boys, scared to let them walk to school alone, scared to be in the house by herself. The threats felt real. The danger felt imminent. Or at least, that's what Chris wanted everyone to believe. The elaborate setup was already in motion. May 5th, 2009. Chris woke up around 5:30 a.m., got dressed for the gym. According to Chris, he left the house at 5:43 a.m. to work out at a gym across the river in St. Louis. Surveillance video from their home security system shows him pulling out of the driveway at that exact time. But here's what Chris claimed. As he was pulling out, he called Sherry to make sure she was awake. She didn't answer. He texted her several times during his workout. No response. At 6:43 a.m., on his way home, Chris called Detective Barlow, asked him to check on Sherry and the boys, said he was worried. After that call, Chris did something odd. Instead of rushing home, he drove past his highway exit. Cell tower records would later prove it. Then he called the Columbia Police Department directly. By the time Chris arrived home at 6:56 a.m., taking 13 minutes to complete what should have been a 5-minute drive, Barlow and backup officers had already made the discovery inside. Medical examiners would later determine this had occurred hours before Chris claimed he left for the gym, which means when Chris was calling and texting Sherry that morning, asking if she was awake, it had already happened. Investigators said the timeline made his story impossible. Officers told Chris his family didn't make it, gave no other details. Chris sat on the ground outside, began to sob, called his father Ron. But he never asked what happened, never asked how it had occurred, never asked who did this, never tried to go inside. One officer noticed fresh scratches on Chris's arms, multiple parallel marks. Shortly after, while being examined in an ambulance, Chris looked down at the marks on his right arm and asked, How did that get there? Then he started banging his fists on the gurney, creating an explanation for the scratches that were already there. Chris was brought to the police station for questioning. Seemed cooperative at first, but detectives noticed odd behavior. Chris requested a blanket, said he was cold. When they brought it, the only part he covered was his scratched arm. During the 6-hour interrogation, Chris never asked whether his security system had recorded anything, never asked for investigation updates. When asked about his marriage, Chris said it was fine, admitted he had a close friend named Tara Lintz, but insisted they were just friends. Meanwhile, detectives in Florida were interviewing Tara. She told a different story. Yes, they were having an affair. Since late November 2008, they'd met up in Phoenix, Hawaii, Maui. They had plans to marry in January 2010. Tara revealed Chris had told her he was serving Sherry with divorce papers on May 5th, the very day of the tragedy. Armed with this information, detectives confronted Chris. At first, Chris denied it. But when told detectives in Florida were talking to Tara right now, Chris couldn't maintain the lie. He admitted to the affair. But that wasn't the most damning evidence. Findings from the crime scene kept coming in. The medical examiner's report showed the timeline didn't match Chris's story. Chris's explanation for the scratches, that he'd gotten them removing a satellite dish, didn't match their fresh appearance. No DNA was found at the scene that didn't belong there. No mysterious intruder, nothing pointing to an outside perpetrator. And then there were the threatening emails and letters. Computer forensics traced every single threatening message back to Chris Coleman's own laptop. The account destroychris@gmail.com had been created on his password-protected work computer. All emails sent from his IP address. The threatening letters contained misspellings that matched Chris's writing patterns perfectly. Bank records showed that 3 months before the tragedy, Chris had purchased the exact brand and color of spray paint, candy apple red, found on the walls. Chris would later claim an intruder found the spray paint and used it. But the receipt told a different story. As investigators dug deeper into Chris's relationship with Tara, the motive became clear. The affair had begun in November 2008, the same month the first threatening message appeared. On Chris's computer, detectives found detailed notes about Tara. Her measurements, her ring size, her favorite things, everything about her. By November 5th, 2008, Chris had written that this was the day Tara changed my life. They'd exchanged promise rings. He'd even written down the name of their future daughter, Zoe. They'd exchanged hundreds of texts, videos, and photos. Tara testified that she'd given Chris an ultimatum. The Colemans had a Disney World trip planned for July 2009. She didn't want him to go. In place of it, Chris planned a cruise to the Virgin Islands with Tara. Friends of Sherry testified that she'd found out about the affair. She'd confronted Chris. She'd gotten Joyce Meyer involved, requiring counseling to keep Chris's job. Chris was furious. Sherry messaged a friend. Chris said I ruined his life, and he can't believe he can't get away from me. But there was a problem. Joyce Meyer Ministries had a strict policy against adultery. If Chris filed for divorce while having an affair, he'd lose his $100,000 a year job. During trial, Joyce testified about this directly. If an employee was having an adulterous affair and filed for divorce, their employment would be terminated. Chris was trapped. He wanted to be with Tara, but he couldn't divorce Sherry without losing everything. And Sherry refused to divorce him. Tara was pressing him harder. They had a wedding date planned. 3 days before the tragedy, Sherry and Chris went to church together. They answered an altar call for a marriage blessing. To outsiders, It looked like they were working things out. The night before, on May 4th, Garrett was supposed to sleep over at a neighbor's birthday party. But Garrett said he couldn't come. Dad said tonight is not a good night, the boy explained. Chris knew what was coming. 2 weeks after the tragedy, on May 19, 2009, Christopher Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree homicide. The trial began April 25, 2011, in Waterloo, Illinois. Jurors were brought in from another county due to extensive pre-trial publicity. Prosecutor Ed Parkinson laid out the case methodically. The threatening emails sent from Chris's computer, the spray paint purchased by Chris, the timeline that didn't match his story, the affair with Tara Lintz, the wedding plans, the ministry's policy on adultery. Sherry's friends testified about her fears, about how Sherry had said, "If anything happens to me, Chris did it." Tara Lintz took the stand, described the affair. When asked if they had plans to marry, her answer was simple. Yes, the divorce had to happen first. Joyce Meyer testified about her ministry's policy on adultery and divorce. The defense tried to argue someone had hacked Chris's computer, that the timeline wasn't precise, that the scratches came from the satellite dish. But the evidence was overwhelming. Medical examiner Dr. Michael Baden testified about the timeline, which contradicted Chris's account of events. Chris never took the stand in his own defense. After 15 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the jury returned their verdict on May 5, 2011, exactly 2 years after the tragedy. Guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree homicide. One juror later revealed that initially, the vote was 7-5 for not guilty. Then they examined a photograph of Chris and Tara together. On the back was a printed date, October 21, 2008. That was before Chris and Tara claimed the affair had started, before the threatening messages began. It proved Chris had been lying, which meant he'd been planning this for far longer than anyone realized. That photograph changed everything. One juror said, "If he lied about when the affair started, what else was he lying about? We looked at that picture and the date, and suddenly all the other circumstantial evidence made perfect sense." The pieces clicked into place. The jury's doubt evaporated. Days after the conviction, Chris waived his right to have the jury decide his sentence, put his fate in the hands of the judge instead. A calculated decision by his defense team. On May 9, 2011, Judge Milton Wharton sentenced Christopher Coleman to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge had considered the ultimate punishment. Illinois was about to abolish that option on July 1, 2011, less than 2 months away. But the judge decided that Coleman's time would be better spent in self-reflection. Better to let him sit in prison for the rest of his life thinking about what he'd done, about the family he'd destroyed, about the future he'd stolen from his sons. Before sentencing, victim impact statements were given. Sherry's aunt and godmother, Cynthia Kopko, spoke through tears. "We loved Sherry and the kids very, very much, and all I have is pictures and memories I can hold in my heart. We watched them grow up, Garrett learning to ride his bike, Gavin learning to play piano. To have this happen is a nightmare we can't wake up from." Chris showed no emotion during the statements, offered no apology, maintained his innocence, sat stone-faced while Sherry's family sobbed. As of 2025, Christopher Coleman is 48 years old. He is incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Walpoon, Wisconsin. He was initially sent to Pontiac Correctional Center in Illinois in May 2011. In August 2011, he was transferred to Wisconsin under an interstate agreement. Coleman continues to serve 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In 2014 and again in 2018, Coleman's attorneys filed appeals requesting a new trial. They argued that the photograph with the date on the back shouldn't have been allowed as evidence. In 2019, a judge granted an evidentiary hearing but ultimately denied the appeal. The conviction stands. In a 2018 interview with Crime Watch Daily from prison, Coleman maintained his innocence. "I had 2 laptops," he claimed. "The one connected to the threats was the one I would leave at home or at work. 6 other people used that laptop." He insisted he was set up, that there were unknown fingerprints, that his defense attorneys didn't present crucial evidence. Coleman's father, Ron, continues to support his son. In the same 2018 interview, Ron offered a disturbing explanation for the affair. "Tara was just meeting a need at the time that Sherry wasn't taking care of," Ron said. "Every man has his desires, and every man has to be respected." When asked if he was saying Sherry was a bad wife, Ron doubled down on blaming her. Coleman's mother, Connie, passed away in June 2020. Until her passing, she maintained her son's innocence. In 2011, Sherry's family filed a wrongful outcome civil lawsuit against Chris Coleman, Joyce Meyer Ministries, and Joyce's son. Initially dismissed, the lawsuit was reinstated on appeal. The appellate court ruled that given the severity of the threats, the ministry had a duty to investigate and protect them. In December 2012, the remains of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were exhumed from Evergreen Cemetery in Chester and relocated to Sherry's hometown outside Chicago. The gravestone remained at Evergreen Cemetery because Ron and Connie Coleman had paid for it. A judge ruled that a convicted individual should not have control over where victims are laid to rest. Christopher Coleman seemed to have it all. Son of pastors, Marine, bodyguard to one of the world's most famous Christian leaders, married with 2 beautiful sons, a 6-figure salary, respect in his community. But it wasn't enough. He wanted Tara Lentz, and his family stood in the way. Rather than face the consequences of his adultery, losing his job, his income, his reputation in the Christian community, Coleman chose the most unthinkable solution. He spent months planning, created the threatening emails to establish a narrative, made sure everyone knew his family was being targeted by some crazed fanatic, built the perfect cover story, bought the spray paint, prepared the scene, calculated every detail. On the night of May 4th, 2009, Coleman told neighbors his son Garrett couldn't come to a sleepover. "Tonight is not a good night," he said. He knew what was coming. He'd already decided. That night, Coleman carried out what he'd been planning. Spray painted those messages on the walls to make it look like the work of a deranged intruder targeting the family. Then he went to the gym to establish his alibi, called and texted Sherry to create a timeline, called his detective neighbor to discover the scene, played the devastated husband and father while investigators gathered evidence that would eventually destroy his carefully constructed lies. The threatening emails traced to his own computer, the spray paint he'd purchased weeks earlier, the timeline that didn't match his story, the affair with Tara, the pressure to divorce, the ministry's adultery policy. The motive crystal clear. Coleman maintained his innocence throughout, never confessed, never showed genuine remorse, never took responsibility. During his interrogation, detectives tried everything to get him to admit the truth. At one point, they even appealed to his faith, his Christian upbringing, his pastor parents. "Unless you really forgive yourself and you're sorry for what you did, there's no way you're going to go to heaven to see your kids," one detective said. "You're going to go straight to hell." Coleman didn't break, didn't confess, continued insisting someone else had done this terrible thing, maintained the lie even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. But the evidence spoke louder than his denials. The jury saw through his lies, and justice was served. Sherry Coleman was 31 years old. Devoted mother to Garrett and Gavin. Loyal friend to many. Woman who loved her husband despite his cruelty. Who wanted desperately to save her marriage. Who told friends, "If anything happens to me, Chris did it." She knew. On some level, she knew. Garrett Coleman was 11. Quiet, thoughtful boy. Loved school and reading. Played piano and violin. Had his whole future ahead of him. Gavin Coleman was 9. The joker of the family. Always trying to make people laugh. Talented at math. Learning piano and guitar. Adored his big brother. The boys never got to grow up. Never got to graduate high school. Never got to fall in love. Never got to have families of their own. Because their father decided they were obstacles to his new life with Tara. Friends and neighbors created a memorial in the subdivision, a bench with trees, a place to remember the lives stolen too soon. The community raised money to help victims of domestic violence. Plans were made to build a Little League field named after Garrett and Gavin. The small town of Columbia, Illinois, was devastated. This kind of violence didn't happen in their quiet suburb. The case received national attention. 48 Hours covered it. Crime Watch Daily interviewed Coleman from prison. Books were written, documentaries were made. But beneath all the media coverage, there are 3 people who should still be here. Sherry, who tried so hard to save her marriage. Garrett, who had so much potential. Gavin, who brought joy to everyone around him. They deserved better. They deserved to live. They deserved a husband and father who would protect them. Instead, they got Christopher Coleman, a man who valued a new relationship and a 6-figure job more than the lives of his own family. A man who sits in a Wisconsin prison today, still insisting he's innocent, still refusing to take responsibility. But the evidence doesn't lie. The jury didn't lie. The computer forensics don't lie. The timeline doesn't lie. Rest in peace, Sherry Coleman. Rest in peace, Garrett. Rest in peace, Gavin. You deserved so much more than what you got. You deserved a life filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. Instead, you got a man who claimed to be a Christian, who claimed to serve God, who worked for a ministry, who was raised by pastors, but who, in the end, was nothing more than a coward and a liar. May you rest in the peace that was stolen from you on earth, and may your memory serve as a reminder that evil can wear the face of faith, and that we must never stop fighting for justice, no matter how long it takes.